The jungle's emerald canopy filtered sunlight into dancing patterns on the forest floor. As Sarah Matthews clutched her swollen belly, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. 3 months pregnant, alone, with nothing but a backpack and the crushing weight of betrayal. The cabin appeared like a mirage through the dense foliage, weathered timber, sagging roof, nature reclaiming what man had abandoned, much like her husband had abandoned her. Inside, dust motes swirled in shafts of light, breaking through boarded windows, illuminating cobwebs and forgotten dreams. Could this forgotten place possibly become a sanctuary for 2 souls when one had yet to take its first breath? What mysteries did these walls hold, and could they withstand the storms yet to come? The sleek high-rise apartment in downtown Seattle felt like a glass cage now. Sarah ran her fingers over the framed photo on the nightstand, her and James on their wedding day, his arms wrapped protectively around her waist, both smiling as if they possessed the secret to eternal happiness. "You promised," she whispered to his image, the gold band on her finger catching the morning light. The wedding ring that once symbolized endless love now felt like a shackle, a reminder of broken vows. 5 years earlier, they'd met at a university fundraiser. Sarah, presenting her research on endangered botanical species, had captivated the room with her passion. James, a rising architect with an appreciation for natural beauty, approached her afterward. "Your work bridges the gap between humanity and nature," he'd said. "I design buildings, but you understand the foundation of everything." Their courtship had been a whirlwind. Weekend hikes through Olympic National Park, candlelit dinners discussing environmental conservation, and late nights where they'd planned their future together. "We'll have a garden," James had promised during their honeymoon, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder as they lay in a Bali bungalow. "And children who'll know the names of every plant you've saved." Sarah had flourished in their marriage. Her position at the Botanical Research Institute grew more prestigious, with James proudly supporting her at every professional milestone. Their apartment filled with rare plants from her expeditions, living testaments to their shared values. The pregnancy wasn't planned, but felt destined. That morning in the bathroom, staring at the positive test, Sarah had felt a completeness she'd never known before. James's initial response, stunned silence followed by a tight embrace, had seemed perfect. "We're having a baby," he'd whispered against her hair, "our own little seedling." But something changed after that day. Subtle at first, James working later hours, his enthusiasm for nursery plans waning. Conversations about the future met with vacant nods. Sarah attributed it to normal anxiety, even as the distance between them grew. 3 weeks ago, she'd scheduled the first ultrasound, texting James the appointment details. His response, a simple "can't make it" meeting with clients, should have been the warning bell. That evening, she'd prepared his favorite meal, determined to bridge the growing chasm between them. When he finally came home, his expression had been resolute, detached. "I need to be honest with you," he'd said, not touching his food. "I'm not ready for this. I thought I was, but I'm not." The words that followed blurred together. Something about his career taking off, about needing freedom, about how parenthood wasn't what he wanted anymore. Each syllable a hammer shattering the foundation of what Sarah thought they'd built. "What about our plans?" she'd asked, hands protectively covering her still flat abdomen. "They were dreams, Sarah. Nice ones, but not reality." The divorce papers arrived 3 days later, along with news that he'd been having an affair with a client for months. The betrayal was complete, not just of Sarah, but of the child growing inside her. His family, once warm and welcoming, turned cold. His mother called, blame dripping from every word. James wasn't ready for fatherhood. "You should have been more careful." Their mutual friends chose sides, most gravitating toward James's charismatic explanation of incompatibility. Sarah became the botanical researcher who couldn't cultivate her own marriage. The apartment, once their sanctuary, became unbearable. Every corner held memories of promises now hollow. Plants that James had gifted her, began to wither despite her care, as if they too sensed the absence of love. At night, Sarah would lie awake, listening to the urban symphony outside, car horns, distant conversations, the pulse of a city that continued despite her world stopping. Her hand would rest on her stomach, feeling the subtle changes as life grew within her. "It's just us now," she would whisper to her unborn child. "But we'll be okay." With each passing day, the walls closed in further. The Botanical Institute granted her leave without question, colleagues avoiding her gaze with pitying glances. The city that had once represented opportunity now felt suffocating, contaminated by memories of a life built on false promises. The divorce papers lay crumpled on the coffee table, Sarah's teardrops having warped the crisp legal text into wavy lines of dissolution. She'd read them so many times the words had lost meaning, becoming merely symbols of an ending she still couldn't comprehend. Rain pelted the windows of the apartment, Seattle's perpetual tears matching her own. 3 calls from James's lawyer today, each more insistent than the last. His family wanted this wrapped up quickly, neatly, as if severing a 5-year marriage while expecting a child could ever be clean. "Miss Matthews, my client is being more than generous with the settlement terms," the lawyer had said in his last voicemail. "Given the circumstances, as if her pregnancy were an inconvenience, a bargaining chip rather than a life they'd created together." The phone rang again. James's sister this time. Sarah let it go to voicemail, already knowing the message would contain thinly veiled accusations. Yesterday it had been, "You know how important this Melbourne project is to him. The timing of all this is just so convenient." As if she'd planned this, as if she'd somehow tricked him into creating a child only to drive him away. The buzzer for the apartment rang sharply, startling her from her thoughts. The doorman's voice came through the intercom. "Miss Matthews, Mr. Matthews, is here to collect some of his things. Should I send him up?" Sarah froze, her hand hovering over the intercom button. She wasn't ready to face him, to see the man who'd promised her forever, now treating her like a stranger. "Miss Matthews?" "No," she finally said, her voice breaking. Tell him to come back when I'm not here." After disconnecting, Sarah moved to the bedroom window that overlooked the building entrance. Minutes later, James emerged, expression thunderous as he spoke heatedly to the doorman. Even from 12 stories up, his anger was palpable. When he looked up toward her window, she stepped back quickly, heart racing. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. The baby moved within her, a fluttering reminder of the life that continued despite her world crumbling. Outside, the city lights blurred through her tears, creating halos that seemed to mock the darkness she felt inside. By morning, her decision was made. The realization came with an odd clarity. She couldn't stay in Seattle, not with James's family's constant harassment, not with sympathetic looks from colleagues, not in this apartment haunted by memories of happiness. With methodical determination, Sarah began making calls, first to her bank, transferring her savings to a new account, then to a real estate agent about subletting the apartment, finally to the Botanical Institute to extend her leave indefinitely. "Are you sure about this, Sarah?" her supervisor asked, concern evident. "We can arrange for you to work in a different department, if that would help." "I need to go," was all Sarah could manage. Somewhere new, each call felt like cutting another tie, severing connections to a life that no longer existed. By afternoon, Sarah had liquidated her non-essential assets, contacted a lawyer of her own, and begun researching remote properties away from cities, away from people. In the guest room closet, she found her old field research equipment, sturdy hiking boots, weatherproof gear, botanical collection kits, tools from her expeditions studying rare plants in remote locations. Before she'd chosen comfort over passion, Sarah packed methodically, selecting only what she and her child would need: practical clothing, essential toiletries, first aid supplies. her most treasured botanical journals, a small photo of her parents, long deceased, nothing that reminded her of James. At the sporting goods store, she purchased additional survival equipment, a high-quality tent, water purification system, emergency rations. The clerk raised eyebrows at her obviously pregnant form. "Going camping in your condition, ma'am?" "Something like that," Sarah replied, sliding her credit card across the counter. That night, her final one in the apartment, Sarah stood on the balcony overlooking the Seattle skyline. The city that had once represented her dreams now felt like a prison she was escaping. Her hand rested on her stomach, feeling the gentle movements within. "We're going to find our own place," she whispered to her unborn child. "Somewhere we can heal, somewhere we belong." In the early morning light, Sarah Matthews walked out of her building for the last time, a backpack containing her new life, her hand protectively cradling her growing belly. No looking back, no second thought, only forward, into uncertainty that somehow felt safer than the broken certainty she was leaving behind. The bus dropped Sarah at the trailhead, the driver giving her a concerned look as she adjusted her heavy backpack. 4 months pregnant now, her body changing daily, she felt the weight of her decision as much as her provisions. "Last stop before the conservation area, ma. You sure this is where you want off?" Sarah nodded, offering a reassuring smile she didn't feel. "I'm meeting friends," she lied, patting the compass in her jacket pocket. The glass was cracked from when she dropped it at the outfitter's store, a small imperfection in an instrument meant to provide direction. Rather fitting, she thought. The first night in the wilderness was the hardest. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves had her bolt upright in her tent. The darkness felt absolute, so different from the light-polluted Seattle sky. But by morning, watching the sun rise over the mountain ridge, something settled in her soul. Day by day, Sarah ventured deeper into the forest, each step taking her further from her past life. She documented plants in her journal, old habits from her research days, providing comfort and purpose. The pregnancy slowed her pace but sharpened her focus. She wasn't just surviving for herself anymore. At night, by campfire light, she'd talk to her unborn child. "That was a western hemlock today," she'd explain, as if the baby could hear her botanical classifications. "And we found salmonberries. We'll have to remember this spot." Her body adapted surprisingly well to the rigors of wilderness living. The morning sickness that had plagued her in Seattle subsided, replaced by a healthy appetite for the freeze-dried meals and foraged supplements she carefully selected. 2 weeks into her journey, Sarah encountered another hiker, a gray-haired woman with weathered skin and knowing eyes. "Expecting, are you?" the woman asked, glancing at Sarah's midsection. "Yes," Sarah replied, instinctively protective. "Brave choice. Coming out here." The woman studied her. Or perhaps not a choice at all. Sarah said nothing, but something in the woman's understanding gaze brought tears to her eyes. "There's a region, 3 days southeast," the woman said after a moment, "where the forest meets the old mining territory. More shelter, good water, fewer people." She marked Sarah's map with a gnarled finger. "The jungle reclaims everything there, even the past." They parted ways, but the woman's words echoed in Sarah's mind. The jungle reclaims everything, even the past. The idea of being reclaimed, of being absorbed into something ancient and enduring, called to her. Following the woman's directions, Sarah turned southeast. The terrain grew more challenging, the vegetation dense. Her compass, with its cracked face, guided her through increasingly tangled paths, the needle sometimes spinning erratically near certain rock formations. Old mining country, with its buried metal deposits, confused the magnetic readings. On the 18th day, rain began, not the gentle Seattle drizzle she knew, but tropical downpours that turned the forest floor into flowing streams and made progress nearly impossible. Sarah found shelter beneath a rock overhang, watching water cascade in sheets before her. The storm lasted 3 days, 3 days of dwindling supplies, 3 days of growing concern as the baby moved restlessly within her. 3 days of wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake, if her escape was going to cost 2 lives instead of saving them. On the morning of the 4th day, disoriented and desperate, Sarah consulted her compass again. The crack had spread across the face, the needle swinging wildly. Useless now, she was truly lost. Pushing through dense undergrowth, branches scratching her arms, Sarah fought rising panic. The forest had changed character, becoming more jungle-like, with hanging vines and broad-leafed plants she recognized from tropical studies, but had never expected to find here. The microclimate, created by the mountains and river systems, had fostered an ecosystem unlike anything she'd anticipated. Exhausted, Sarah rested against a massive tree trunk, sipping carefully rationed water. The baby kicked strongly, as if protesting their predicament. "I know," she whispered, placing a hand on her rounded belly. "I'll figure this out, I promise." Rising to continue, Sarah glimpsed something through the foliage, a straight line where nature created only curves. Heart pounding, she pushed forward, breaking through a wall of vines. There, nestled in a small clearing, stood a structure, man-made, weathered by time and elements, half reclaimed by the forest, but unmistakably a cabin. Its roof sagged dangerously, windows boarded or broken, the porch listing to one side. To Sarah, it was the most beautiful sight she'd ever seen. Approaching the cabin cautiously, Sarah tested each step on the rotting porch. The weathered door hung askew on rusted hinges, requiring her shoulder to push it open. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of light filtering through gaps in the wall. The musty scent of abandonment filled her nostrils. "Hello," she called, her voice echoing in the emptiness. Only the scurrying of a eel creature in the corner answered her. The interior was sparse. A wooden table, its surface warped by years of humidity, a cast iron stove thick with rust, a handmade chair with a broken leg, shelves holding dusty jars and canisters. A ladder led to a small loft where a threadbare mattress lay forgotten. In one corner, Sarah spotted an old kerosene lamp. She wiped away layers of grime with her sleeve, revealing brass detailing beneath. Testing the mechanism, she found it still functional, though empty of fuel. "Look at that," she whispered to her unborn child. "Our first housewarming gift." Thunder rumbled outside as afternoon turned to evening. The rainy season was intensifying. Sarah had no choice but to make this shelter work for at least the night. She unrolled her sleeping bag on the cleanest patch of floor she could find, laying out her meager supplies. As darkness fell, shadows transformed the cabin into something more ominous. Every creak and groan of settling wood made Sarah start. Without the lamp's light, the darkness was absolute, reminding her how far she was from civilization. "Just the wind," she murmured when a particularly loud thump came from the roof. But doubt crept in with the darkness. What if someone else used this place? What if she wasn't alone? Rain began pounding on the roof, soon revealing multiple leaks. Sarah positioned her cooking pots to catch the worst drips, their rhythmic pinging creating an eerily musical backdrop to her fears. Sleep proved elusive. Her pregnancy made finding a comfortable position difficult, even under the best circumstances. On the hard cabin floor, with water occasionally splashing near her head and unknown creatures rustling in corners, rest seemed impossible. A particularly violent thunderclap startled Sarah fully awake. In the brief flash of lightning that followed, she saw something that turned her blood cold. Eyes reflecting in the loft above, watching her, heart pounding. She fumbled for her flashlight. When she finally managed to switch it on with trembling fingers, the beam revealed only cobwebs, nothing with eyes, nothing watching, her exhausted mind playing tricks. "Get it together, Sarah," she whispered fiercely. "You're a scientist, not some scared child." To calm herself, she began cataloging facts about her situation aloud, a technique she'd used during anxiety-inducing research expeditions. Shelter, compromised but serviceable. Water, plentiful if filtered. Food sufficient for 2 weeks. Location unknown but likely within the conservation area boundaries. Structural integrity of cabin questionable but standing. The methodical assessment settled her nerves. This was just another field assignment. She'd conducted research in remote locations before, sometimes for months. The only difference was her pregnancy, which complicated matters but didn't make them impossible. As the storm raged on, Sarah found herself studying the cabin more objectively. Despite its disrepair, the structure had good bones. The positioning, nestled against a hillside, protected by large trees, showed thoughtful planning. Someone had loved this place once. In her flashlight beam, Sarah noticed markings on one wall, tallies, dates, observations about plant growth and rainfall patterns. A researcher had lived here, someone with interests similar to her own. "See that?" she said, hand on her belly where the baby kicked steadily. "Someone like me was here, someone who understood this place." Around midnight, the storm's fury began to subside. Exhaustion finally overcame Sarah's anxiety, and she drifted into fitful sleep, the kerosene lamp clutched in one hand, like a talisman. Her dreams were a jumble of Seattle skyscrapers transforming into trees, of James walking away down an endless forest path, of a faceless woman writing botanical notes in this very cabin. Sarah woke at dawn to sunlight streaming through the cabin's eastern window. Birds called in the forest outside, and the air smelled clean after the night's rain. For the first time in months, she'd slept until morning without waking to cry. Rising stiffly, Sarah moved to the doorway, surveying what daylight revealed. The clearing around the cabin contained overgrown remnants of garden beds. The stream she'd heard last night tumbled past just 50 yards away. Fruit trees, now wild and untended, stood at the edge of the clearing. Despite everything, the leaking roof, the structural concerns, the isolation, Sarah felt something she hadn't expected: possibility. Morning light revealed both challenges and opportunity. Sarah stood in the center of the cabin, hands on her hips, mentally cataloging each problem that needed solving. The roof had at least 3 major leaks. 2 windows were completely broken, another boarded up. The floor had soft spots that groaned dangerously when stepped on. The chimney was likely blocked. Given the soot stains around the stove, she'd need to be methodical, prioritize shelter, water, food, security. The basics of survival. Taking a piece of yellowed paper from a drawer and a stubby pencil from her pack, Sarah began drawing a rough map of the cabin and its surroundings. Each problem was noted, each resource marked. The stream to the east, berry bushes to the north, what appeared to be an old tool shed, now barely standing, to the south. The clearest path back towards civilization to the west. Organization is half the battle, she told her unborn child, a phrase her father had repeated throughout her childhood. The baby kicked as if in agreement, the map complete. Sarah stepped outside to explore more thoroughly. The clearing was larger than it had appeared last night, nearly an acre of land once tamed, but now returning to wilderness. Raised beds, their wooden borders rotting, still showed signs of deliberate planting among the weeds. Herbs gone wild, rosemary, thyme, mint, competed with native species. Sarah approached the stream, testing its flow with experienced eyes, clean, fast-moving, likely safe to drink after proper filtration. Fish darted in deeper pools, a potential food source. She filled her water bottles, adding purification tablets. The remains of what might have been a chicken coop stood nearby, wire mesh rusted through in places. Further exploration revealed an outhouse, still structurally sound, though in need of cleaning, and a rain barrel system that could be salvaged. Back inside, Sarah conducted a more thorough inventory. The kitchen cabinets contained ancient canned goods, unsafe now, but also useful tools: cast iron pans, kitchen knives, a hand-cranked can opener. A trunk beneath the loft yielded mothball-scented blankets that would be serviceable after airing. Most promising was a shelf of dusty books, field guides to local plants, handbooks on cabin maintenance, a first aid manual specific to wilderness injuries, knowledge that could mean the difference between survival and disaster. Sarah's botanical expertise allowed her to identify numerous edible plants around the cabin. Stinging nettles, delicious when properly prepared and rich in nutrients her pregnant body needed. Dandelions, chickweed, wild onions. The berry bushes would fruit later in the season. Apple trees, though untended for years, might still produce. "We won't starve," she said, patting her growing belly. By midday, Sarah had created lists of immediate needs, resources available, and tasks to complete. The map had expanded to include the entire clearing and nearby forest edges, with annotations about plants and landmarks. This visual representation of her new domain gave her a sense of control she hadn't felt since discovering James's betrayal. The most pressing issue was the roof. Rain would come again, and sleeping amidst leaks was untenable. Sarah investigated the tool shed, finding it a treasure trove, despite its dilapidated state. Hammers, nails, a handsaw, even tarps folded and stored in a metal container that had protected them from the elements. Surveying the cabin from outside, Sarah noted where the worst leaks corresponded with damaged shingles. The roof wasn't steep. She could potentially repair it herself, though the prospect of climbing up there in her condition was daunting. One problem at a time, she reminded herself. As afternoon waned, Sarah focused on making one corner of the cabin truly habitable. She swept away decades of dust and debris, scrubbed the floor with stream water and a stiff brush found in the shed, and laid out her sleeping bag on a bed of clean blankets. The stove, after hours of careful cleaning and chimney checking, accepted a small fire. The ancient iron pot, scoured with sand from the stream, now held a soup of rehydrated camp provisions and fresh nettles. The simple act of creating a meal in this forgotten place felt like reclaiming something vital. As dusk approached, Sarah sat on the cabin's porch, soup in hand, watching the forest darken. Birds called their evening songs, small creatures rustled in underbrush. The stream's constant murmur provided a soothing backdrop. The map lay across her knees, covered now with notes and plans, not just a record of what existed, but a vision of what could be. A broken cabin becoming a home, a lost woman finding direction. For the first time in months, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Days blended into one another as Sarah established her survival routine. Each morning began with tending the small fire in the cast-iron stove, boiling water from the stream, and checking her growing collection of containers catching roof leaks. Her body, now carrying 5 months of pregnancy, demanded more rest than she wanted to give it. From branches and dried grasses, Sarah fashioned a crude broom. The simple tool became a symbol of her determination to create order from chaos. Each sweeping motion cleared away not only decades of dust and debris, but also the lingering doubts about her decision to flee civilization. "Cleanliness prevents disease," she explained to her unborn child, as she methodically swept every corner of the single-room cabin, "and gives us control over one small part of our world." The broom accompanied her throughout the day's tasks, propped against the wall while she sorted through salvageable items, leaning by the door as she ventured out to gather edibles, resting beside her as she ate simple meals by firelight. Food storage presented the next challenge. Without refrigeration, Sarah needed to preserve what she gathered. She cleaned ancient mason jars found in cobwebbed cabinets, boiling them in the large pot to sterilize. Wild berries became jam when boiled with the last of her sugar rations. Nettles and other greens were dried on strings hanging from the rafters, creating a fragrant canopy. Fire-making skills improved through necessity. The matches from her backpack were rationed carefully, each one precious. She practiced with the flint and steel found in a rusted box, producing sparks that caught on dried moss and pine needles. Her triumph at creating flame without matches felt monumental. "Did you see that?" she exclaimed, when the first successful fire blazed in the stove from her own sparks. The baby kicked vigorously, as if applauding. The outhouse required 2 full days of cleaning and repair before Sarah felt comfortable using it. She dug a new pit nearby, ready for when the current one filled. Such practical concerns occupied her mind, leaving little room for dwelling on the past. Bathing happened at midday when the sun warmed the clearing. Sarah would fill buckets from the stream, let them warm in the sunlight, then use them for sponge baths behind the cabin. The simple pleasure of being clean afterward brought unexpected content. As weeks passed, Sarah's body changed dramatically. Her belly protruded firmly now, making some tasks increasingly difficult. Bending to collect kindling caused backaches. Carrying water buckets strained her balance. Yet her arms grew stronger, her hands toughened, her skin bronzed by the sun. One evening, as Sarah prepared a meal of stream fish, wrapped in wild grape leaves, a technique gleaned from one of the cabin's old books, she felt a profound connection to the women who had lived this way for millennia. Pregnant, alone, relying on wit and will to survive, there was power in this lineage. "We are part of something ancient," she told her baby, as she turned the fish over the fire. "Something that doesn't need skyscrapers or smartphones or approval from others to exist." The cabin slowly transformed. Corner by corner it yielded to Sarah's stubborn efforts. The sleeping area now boasted a proper mattress, stuffed with dried grasses and covered with cleaned blankets. A table stood steady after she'd reinforced its wobbling leg. Shelves held organized supplies, food, tools, medicinal plants identified from the field guides. Not every day brought victory. Some mornings, Sarah woke to find raccoons had invaded her food stores despite precaution. Rain sometimes came so heavily that all her containers overflowed, leaving puddles on the floor. Occasionally, waves of exhaustion hit so strongly that she accomplished nothing beyond basic sustenance. On one such difficult day, Sarah sat on the porch, tears streaming down her face as hormones and isolation overwhelmed her. Through blurred vision, she watched a hummingbird hover near the wild honeysuckle growing along the cabin wall. The tiny creature, so perfectly adapted to its environment, paused as if regarding her, then continued its efficient feeding. "We adapt," Sarah whispered, wiping her tears. "We survive." That evening, eating a simple stew by firelight, Sarah realized she'd gone an entire day without thinking of James or Seattle or the life she'd left behind. The realization didn't come with pain or longing, but with quiet surprise. The wilderness was becoming her present, not just her escape. The broom stood in the corner, a humble testament to her first victory over chaos. Sarah glanced at it as she prepared for sleep, the simple tool representing more than cleanliness. It symbolized her first step toward transforming this abandoned shelter into something that might someday be called home. The floorboard creaked differently than the others. Sarah paused her sweeping, tapping her foot on the spot again. A hollow sound responded, unlike the solid thunk from surrounding planks. Kneeling awkwardly with her growing belly, she examined the area more closely. A barely perceptible seam outlined a 2-foot square section. Sarah ran her fingers along the edge, finding a small notch at one corner. When she pressed it, nothing happened. She tried pulling upward, still nothing. Frustrated, she pushed down firmly on the opposite corner. A soft click rewarded her persistence. The section loosened, revealing a hidden compartment beneath the floor. "Well, look at that," she murmured, heart quickening. Using a kitchen knife as leverage, Sarah carefully lifted the concealed door. Dust motes swirled in the beam of afternoon light that illuminated the cavity's contents. A metal box, roughly the size of a small suitcase. With effort, she extracted the container and placed it on the table. No lock secured it, just a simple latch tarnished with age. Sarah hesitated, suddenly feeling like an intruder, despite having lived in the cabin for nearly a month now. "We're just borrowing this place," she told her unborn child. But maybe this can help us understand who it really belongs to. The box opened with a protesting squeal of hinges. Inside, protected from the elements, lay a leather-bound journal, several folders of yellowed papers, seed packets sealed in wax paper, and a collection of black and white photographs. Sarah lifted the journal reverently. The cover bore no name, just the embossed image of a flowering plant she recognized as native to this region. The pages, though yellowed, remained intact and covered with elegant handwriting. Observations, sketches, personal reflections. The first entry was dated May. "I've finally done it. Left everything behind for this place of my own. Richard thinks I've lost my mind, abandoning a perfectly good teaching position to play nun woman. Perhaps I have, but after 30 years in classrooms explaining the wonders of botany to disinterested students, I need to live among the plants I've studied all my life." Sarah's breath caught. These were the words of a woman who had made choices not unlike her own. The property was cheap, abandoned mining company cabin with 10 acres of untouched forest. No electricity, no running water, just what I've dreamed of for years. My colleagues at the university think this is a sabbatical. Only I know it's forever. The writer identified herself several pages later. Eleanor Pruitt, former professor of botany at a West Coast university. As Sarah read further, a portrait emerged of a woman who had rejected conventional expectations to pursue her passion in isolation. Eleanor had transformed the cabin from a dilapidated shelter into a research station. She documented hundreds of plant species, experimented with cultivation techniques, and developed medicinal preparations from native flora. Her notes were meticulous, scientific, yet infused with a profound love for her surroundings. Between research entries came more personal reflections. "Second Christmas alone. Richard sent another letter begging me to come to my senses and return to civilization. He cannot understand that I've never felt more sane, more connected to what matters. The silence here speaks volumes more than faculty meetings ever did." Sarah turned pages carefully, moved by the parallels to her own situation. Eleanor had faced judgment for her choices too, had been told she was throwing her life away. Yet she had created something meaningful here, something entirely hers. The journal documented 15 years of Eleanor's life in the cabin. Sarah learned how she'd survived harsh winters, interactions with occasional hikers, her growing reputation among locals as the plant lady of the ridge. Eleanor had created gardens, built additions to the cabin, catalogued ecosystems, all on her own. Then abruptly the entries stopped. The final pages contained pressed flowers and loose notes, but no explanation for why the journal ended or what had become of its author. The photographs showed a slender woman with gray-streaked hair and keen eyes, usually kneeling beside plants or working in the garden. In later images, Eleanor had aged visibly, but her expression remained one of contentment. Among the seed packets, Sarah found varieties she recognized from the overgrown garden, heritage vegetables, medicinal herbs, flowers chosen for their ability to attract pollinators. Each packet bore handwritten notes about planting depths, sunlight requirements, and uses. "She left everything organized," Sarah whispered, surveying the box's contents, as if she knew someone would find it someday. The afternoon faded into evening as Sarah immersed herself in Eleanor's world. By firelight she read about the very cabin she now occupied, the surrounding forest she now foraged, the stream she drank from. Through Eleanor's eyes, Sarah saw not an abandoned shelter, but a beloved home with history and purpose. For the first time since arriving, Sarah didn't feel like an intruder or a temporary occupant. She felt like an inheritor, a caretaker of something precious that had been waiting to be found again. Eleanor's journal became Sarah's most precious possession. Each evening, by the warmth of the stove, she'd read another section, absorbing the wisdom of the woman who'd lived here before her. The pages contained not just botanical knowledge, but practical skills: how to repair cabin damage, preserve food, predict weather patterns in this microclimate. The roof leaks above the eastern window during heavy rains, Eleanor had written decades earlier. Replacing individual shingles only works temporarily. The underlying support beam has rotted and must be reinforced before proper repairs can be made. Sarah stood on the porch, looking up at the exact spot Eleanor had described, where water still dripped during storms. The beam would have deteriorated further in the intervening years. According to the journal, the tools she needed should be in the storage shed. First carpentry project, Sarah told her baby, now active enough to respond to her voice with distinct movements. Eleanor says we can do it, so we'll try. Following the detailed instructions, Sarah salvaged usable lumber from the collapsed chicken coop. The handsaw moved awkwardly in her grip at first, her academic hands unused to such labor. Blisters formed, broke, and eventually hardened into calluses. Her expanding belly made balance challenging, but she adapted, finding ways to brace herself while working. The ladder presented the greatest challenge. Sarah tested each rung carefully before trusting her weight to it. From the top, she could see the extent of the roof damage, far worse than visible from below, but not beyond repair. Working methodically, she removed rotted shingles, exposing the deteriorated beam beneath. Just as you said, Eleanor, she murmured, feeling a connection to the cabin's previous occupant that transcended time. Replacing the beam required all her strength and ingenuity. She fashioned a temporary support using techniques described in the journal, then maneuvered the new lumber into position inch by laborious inch. When the final nail drove home, Sarah felt a triumph beyond anything she'd experienced in academic achievements. That night, rain fell again. Sarah sat wrapped in blankets, listening intently. Water still dripped in the far corner where she hadn't yet repaired, but above the eastern window, silence. Her repair had worked. The roof was only the beginning. With Eleanor's journal as her guide, Sarah tackled project after project. She installed a water collection system using salvaged gutters and barrels, created storage shelves from repurposed lumber, and reinforced the porch with new support posts. Each success built her confidence. Each failure taught valuable lessons. The window repairs took 3 attempts before she managed to properly seal against drafts. The chimney cleaning left her covered in soot, but rewarded her with a stove that drew properly without smoke. Eleanor says we should start the garden beds now, Sarah told her unborn child as is cleared overgrown plots according to the journal's planting diagrams. So they'll be ready when you arrive. Using seeds from Eleanor's collection, Sarah planted according to the careful instructions. Some varieties stored properly in their wax paper packets remained viable despite their age. Others had expired, but Sarah substituted wild equivalents using her botanical knowledge. By her 6th month of pregnancy, Sarah's body had changed dramatically. Her belly protruded prominently now, making physical labor increasingly difficult, yet her arms had strengthened, her hands grown capable of tasks she'd never imagined performing. The woman who had once presented research papers in conference halls now split firewood, albeit in smaller quantities than before. Different kind of strength, she reflected, resting a hand on her swollen abdomen. Morning sickness had long since passed, replaced by ravenous hunger that her foraging barely satisfied. Eleanor's journal provided solutions here too, which wild plants contained the iron, calcium and other nutrients her pregnant body required. Sarah followed these nutritional guidelines, religiously trusting the wisdom of the woman who'd thrived here alone. Some days brought almost unbearable backaches and swollen ankles. On those occasions, Sarah would rest on the porch, watching clouds drift over the forest canopy, feeling her baby's movements, and reading Eleanor's more philosophical entries. Solitude is not loneliness, Eleanor had written. In the absence of human voices, we begin to hear everything else. The language of birds, the whispers of leaves, the stories told by the changing light. Perhaps true solitude is impossible, in a world so full of life. Sarah understood this distinction now. Though alone, she rarely felt lonely. Between the active presence growing inside her, the daily communion with nature, and the spiritual connection to Eleanor through the journal. She existed in a state of solitary communion rather than isolation. The cabin, once alien and intimidating, had become familiar under her hands. She knew which floorboards creaked, which walls held the day's heat longest, which corner caught the first morning light. With each repair, each improvement, the structure responded like a living thing being healed. The day began with unnatural stillness. No bird songs greeted dawn. No breeze stirred the leaves. Sarah stood on the porch, 7 months pregnant now, sensing the change in air pressure that Eleanor's journal had described as preceding major storms. Barometric pressure dropped significantly before the season's worst tempest. Eleanor had written, "When even the jays fall silent, seek shelter and secure everything that might blow away." Sarah heeded the warning, spending the morning bringing in the drying herbs, moving her tools to the shed, and filling extra water containers. Her garden, now flourishing with Eleanor's seeds, needed protection from potential flooding. She dug small trenches to direct water away from the tender plants, covering the most vulnerable with makeshift shields of bark. By noon, dark clouds massed on the horizon, their underbellies an ominous green-gray. Wind arrived suddenly, bending treetops and sending dead leaves spiraling upward. The temperature dropped sharply. Inside the cabin, Sarah made final preparations. She positioned buckets under known leak points, stoked the stove with extra wood, and arranged her emergency supplies within easy reach. The weather radio she'd brought from Seattle, one luxury she'd allowed herself, crackled with static between warnings of severe thunderstorms throughout the region. Sustained winds of 40 to 50 miles per hour with gusts reaching 70. Flash flooding possible in low-lying areas. Residents advised to shelter in place. Sarah placed her hand on her swollen belly, feeling the baby shift restlessly, as if sensing the approaching chaos. "We'll be fine," she assured them both. The cabin survived worse. The storm announced itself with a thunderclap so powerful it seemed to shake the very foundation. Rain followed immediately, not in drops but in sheets, pounding the roof with deafening intensity. Wind howled through the trees, their creaking audible even over the deluge. Despite Sarah's repairs, new leaks appeared where the driving rain found weaknesses in the aging structure. She moved frantically between them, emptying buckets, repositioning containers, using towels to stem the worst flows. Water began seeping under the door, spreading across the wooden floor in expanding puddles. A tremendous crack split the twilight gloom, followed by the unmistakable sound of falling timber. Sarah peered through the window to see an ancient pine, its trunk nearly 3 feet in diameter, toppled mere yards from the cabin. Its massive root ball, torn from the earth, had created a crater that rapidly filled with water. The sight sent Sarah into urgent action. That tree had stood on higher ground. Its absence would change water flow patterns during the downpour. She grabbed Eleanor's journal, flipping frantically to the section on flooding. The cabin sits on a natural rise, but during the 77 deluge, water diverted from the eastern slope threatened the foundation. I created an emergency trench system, following the natural contours away from the structure. Sarah found the diagram Eleanor had drawn and realized with growing dread that the fallen pine had been a key component in the natural drainage system. Without it, water would flow directly toward the cabin's northern wall, its most vulnerable point. Despite the storm's fury, Sarah knew she had to act. Wrapping herself in her rain gear, she ventured outside, the wind nearly knocking her off balance. The fallen tree had created exactly the problem she feared, a new channel directing rainwater straight toward the cabin. Already a significant flow rushed through the depression. Working by lightning flashes and the beam of her flashlight, Sarah began digging with desperate intensity. Her spade cut through the sodden earth, creating a diversion channel to redirect the water. Rain pelted her face, wind tore at her clothing, but she continued methodically, remembering Eleanor's precise instructions. An hour later, soaked to the skin despite her gear, Sarah had completed a rudimentary drainage system. Water now flowed around the cabin rather than toward it, following her hastily dug trenches toward the natural drainage creek beyond the clearing. Back inside, exhausted and chilled, Sarah stripped off her wet clothes and wrapped herself in dry blankets. The baby moved vigorously, as if protesting the exertion and exposure. "I know," she whispered, rubbing her belly soothingly, "but we had to protect our home." The word surprised her, even as she said it. Home, not shelter, not hiding place, but home. Throughout the night, the storm's intensity fluctuated. Wind rattled the windows. Rain found new paths through the roof. Thunder shook the walls. Sarah retreated to the corner furthest from the leaks, huddled in her blankets, one hand protectively cradling her abdomen. She read Eleanor's storm accounts by candlelight, drawing courage from the other woman's experiences. "The tempests remind us of our proper place in the natural order," Eleanor had written. "Not masters, but participants. The humility this teaches is worth the discomfort." Near dawn, the storm's yaws finally began to wane. Rain softened to a steady patter. Wind subsided to occasional gusts. Sarah, who had dozed fitfully through the night, rose stiffly to assess the damage. Water covered most of the floor in a shallow pool. The north wall showed ominous wet stains from foundation to halfway up. One window had cracked, though the oiled paper covering had prevented glass from shattering inward. Outside, her garden trenches had mostly held, though some plants lay flat. Most striking was the lightning-struck tree visible through the eastern window. A massive oak, split down its center but still standing, its wound raw and exposed to the dawn light. The tree hadn't fallen, despite its injury. Its remaining healthy portions would continue to grow, adapting around the damage. Sarah pressed her palm against the cabin's damp wall. "We're still standing too," she whispered. The storm's aftermath revealed new challenges. Fallen branches littered the clearing. A section of the repaired roof had been damaged again, and the garden needed significant rehabilitation. Sarah worked methodically, addressing one problem at a time, despite her growing fatigue. At nearly 8 months pregnant, every task required twice the effort. While clearing debris from the garden beds, Sarah became aware of a prickling sensation at the back of her neck. The feeling of being watched. She straightened slowly, one hand instinctively protective over her rounded belly, and turned toward the forest edge. A man stood partially concealed by foliage, observing her silently. Elderly, with deeply lined copper skin and silver hair pulled back in a long braid, he wore weathered clothing that blended with the forest. Most striking was his stillness, not the frozen posture of someone caught spying, but the natural patience of a person accustomed to wilderness observation. Sarah's heart raced, but she forced herself to remain calm. This was the first human she'd encountered since arriving at the cabin months ago. "Hello," she called, her voice rusty from disuse in conversation. The man made no response but stepped forward into the clearing. He carried a walking stick carved with intricate patterns and a woven bag slung across his shoulder. His gaze moved deliberately from Sarah to the cabin, the garden, the repairs in progress, then back to her pregnant form. "I'm Sarah," she offered, gesturing to herself. After a long moment he spoke, his English accented but clear. "You live in Eleanor's place now." Not a question, but a statement. Sarah nodded. "I found it abandoned. I didn't know it belonged to someone. Eleanor is gone many years." He approached closer, studying her with intensity, but without hostility. "I am Matteo. I was friend to Eleanor." Sarah relaxed slightly. "You knew her?" "I found her journal. She taught me how to survive here." Matteo nodded, unsurprised. "She kept many writings, said someone would need them someday." His gaze lingered on her belly. "Did not expect this." The directness of his observation made Sarah self-conscious, but she sensed no judgment, only assessment. "I needed somewhere safe," she explained simply. Without asking permission, Matteo moved past her to examine the garden. He knelt, testing soil between his fingers, inspecting plants with practiced eyes. Using Eleanor's seeds, he noted. Yes, some didn't sprout, but many did. Wrong season for planting, but they grow anyway. A hint of approval colored his tone. He pointed to a section where Sarah had improvised with wild varieties. These not Eleanor's. Your knowledge? I was a botanist. Before, she gestured vaguely toward her pregnant belly. This information seemed to shift something in Matteo's assessment. He straightened, nodding. Like Eleanor. She was plant knower too. From his bag, Matteo withdrew a bundle wrapped in large leaves. He unwrapped it to reveal several wooden carvings, small animals rendered with remarkable detail. A deer, rabbit, fox and bear. Eleanor kept these by her bed, for protection spirits. He arranged them on a flat stone near the garden. Should be returned to their place. The simple act seemed ceremonial, linking past to present. Sarah felt an unexpected emotion watching this stranger honor Eleanor's memory so naturally. Thank you, she said softly. Mio studied her face. You have her eyes, not color, but seeing. Good eyes for forest. Over the next hour, Matteo walked the property with Sarah, indicating areas vulnerable to future storms, pointing out plants she hadn't recognized, showing her a better way to secure the roof. His knowledge was practical, delivered in sparse sentences, with no wasted words. When they reached the lightning-struck oak, Matteo placed his weathered hand against its split trunk. Tree will live. Differently now. I thought it would die, Sarah admitted. Matteo shook his head. Strong roots will grow around wound. He glanced meaningfully at Sarah's pregnant form. Like you. The comparison startled her, but she couldn't deny its truth. She was growing around her wound, adapting rather than succumbing. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Matteo prepared to leave. We'll come again, bring Elena. She knows about. He gestured to Sarah's belly. Birthing. The word sent a flutter of anxiety through Sarah. She'd been determinedly avoiding thoughts of how she would manage childbirth alone. Is Elena a doctor? She asked, hopefully. Matteo's weathered face creased with something between amusement and respect. Better than doctor for forest births. Many generations of knowing. Before departing, Matteo left Sarah with several bundles of herbs she didn't recognize, and instructions for their use. His final words were both reassurance and warning. You not alone in these woods. Never were. Then he melted back into the forest, with a silence that made Sarah wonder if she'd imagined the entire encounter. That evening, Sarah placed Eleanor's animal carvings on the small shelf near her bed, exactly as Matteo had instructed. The simple wooden figures seemed to transform the space, making it feel less like a temporary shelter and more like a place with continuity, with history. We have neighbors, she told her unborn child as she prepared for sleep. And apparently we have Eleanor's eyes. The baby kicked vigorously in response, the strongest movement yet. Sarah placed her palm against the spot, smiling in the darkness. Yes, I think it's good news too. True to his word, Matteo returned 3 days later, accompanied by a woman who could only be Elena, short and sturdy with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a tight bun. She carried herself with the unmistakable authority of someone whose competence had never been questioned. Her sharp eyes missed nothing as she surveyed the cabin and its occupant. So you are the new forest woman, Elena said by way of greeting, her English more fluent than Matteo's, but similarly accented. Let me see you properly. Without waiting for permission, Elena circled Sarah, noting her posture, the way she carried her now prominent belly, the color in her cheeks. Weathered hands pressed gently but firmly on Sarah's abdomen, measuring, assessing. How many months? Elena asked. Almost 8, I think. Elena nodded. The baby sits high. Strong heartbeat I can feel. But you, her critical gaze moved to Sarah's face. Too thin for this stage, not enough protein. From her bag, Elena produced dried meat strips and a container of what looked like preserved berries. Eat. Good for blood. The meat was unfamiliar, gamey but not unpleasant. Sarah chewed obediently under Elena's watchful eye, aware that she was being evaluated in ways beyond the medical. "When baby comes, you cannot be alone," Elena stated flatly. "First birth is unpredictable." The reality Sarah had been avoiding settled heavily on her shoulders. "I don't have anywhere else to go." Elena exchanged a look with Matteo. "We will come when time is near. I have delivered many babies, but you must be prepared." She pointed to Sarah's small medical kit. "Not enough." For the next hour, Elena inventoried the cabin, making notes in her own language that Matteo occasionally translated. She examined Sarah's supplies, inspected the cleanliness of the space, tested the water collection system. Her assessment was both practical and comprehensive. "You need birthing preparations," Elena concluded. "Clean cloths, more medicines, better food," and this she tapped a piece of bark from her bag, "for pain during labor." While Elena continued her inventory, Matteo helped Sarah create a calendar on a smooth board, using charcoal from the stove. Together they marked the current date, counted back to Sarah's last remembered menstrual cycle, and calculated potential birth date. "Moon will be full here." Matteo indicated a spot approximately 5 weeks forward. "Good birthing time." Sarah traced the marks with trembling fingers, the reality of what was approaching suddenly overwhelming. Until now, pregnancy had been a condition to manage alongside survival. The calendar made the baby's arrival concrete, imminent. "I'm afraid," she admitted, the words escaping before she could stop them. Matteo nodded, unsurprised. Fear is wisdom when facing big things. Foolish not to fear, Elena returned with her list of necessities. "We will bring what you need, but you must build strength." She pointed to the calendar. 5 weeks to prepare body and place. Before departing, Elena conducted a more thorough examination of Sarah's pregnancy. Her experienced hands mapped the baby's position, measured growth, checked Sarah's blood pressure, using techniques that required no equipment. "Baby is healthy," she pronounced. "Good size, good position. But water's low. You must drink more, rest more." Her stern expression softened slightly. "You have done well alone. But hardest part comes." When they left, promising to return in 1 week with supplies, Sarah felt both reassured and terrified. The calendar on the wall seemed to pulse with significance, each mark bringing her closer to the moment when her solitary existence would fundamentally change. That evening, Sarah added her own notation system to the calendar, creating symbols to track her symptoms, the baby's movements, and the preparations still needed. The methodical recording calmed her, giving structure to the countdown. Days passed with new purpose. Following Elena's instructions, Sarah gathered specific plants with medicinal properties, prepared the cabin's warmest corner as a birthing area, and consumed the protein-rich foods Matteo had identified. The calendar acquired new marks each evening, a visual representation of time's steady progress. One morning, while checking rabbit snares Matteo had taught her to set, Sarah was overcome with a wave of dizziness. She steadied herself against a tree, breathing deeply until the spell passed. Later that day, her ankles swelled dramatically, and pressure in her lower back became constant rather than occasional. Elena's warnings about preeclampsia came rushing back. Sarah checked her symptoms against the midwife's descriptions: headache, swelling, visual disturbances, not severe enough to panic, but concerning. "Just a few more weeks," she told her baby, monitoring her body with clinical detachment despite her fears. "We've come this far together." That night, Sarah sat on the porch watching fireflies illuminate the clearing. The calendar hung visibly through the window, its markings a countdown not just to birth, but to the moment when everything would change again. From woman alone to mother responsible for another life. From survivor to protect. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the strong, regular movements within. "Eleanor survived here for 15 years, she whispered to the night. "We can manage too." The calendar reflected moonlight, its marks casting thin shadows across the cabin wall. 5 weeks to prepare not just a place for childbirth, but a home for childhood. The magnitude of this realization settled over Sarah like a weighted blanket, heavy but somehow comforting in its solidity. The cabin had evolved. Once a shelter of necessity, it had transformed under Sarah's hands into something approaching a home. The leaking roof now shed water efficiently. Walls, reinforced and sealed with techniques from Eleanor's journal and Matteo's knowledge, kept drafts at bay. Windows, reframed and covered with oiled paper where glass couldn't be salvaged, admitted soft, diffused light. Inside, order had replaced chaos. The main room served multiple functions: cooking area with the restored cast-iron stove, dining space with the sturdy table Sarah had rebuilt, living area with a chair salvaged from the shed, and the loft had become a storage space for preserved foods and materials not immediately needed. Most significant was the nursery corner. Using tools borrowed from Matteo, Sarah had crafted a cradle from salvaged wood. The project had taken weeks, her pregnant body making woodworking increasingly difficult, but the result filled her with quiet pride. The cradle was simple but sound, sanded smooth to prevent splinters, lined with the softest fabric she could create from repurposed blankets. "What do you think?" she asked her unborn child, running her hands over the curved edges of the cradle. "Your first bed," the baby responded with a series of kicks that made Sarah laugh. Nearly 9 months pregnant now, she found these exchanges increasingly meaningful, her body a bridge between her solitary existence and the partnership to come. Outside, the garden flourished despite the unconventional planting time. Vegetables grew in neat rows, medicinal herbs thrived in dedicated beds, and wildflowers attracted bees for pollination. Sarah had installed irrigation channels using bamboo split lengthwise, ensuring plants received consistent water even when she couldn't tend them daily. The rhythm of days had settled into predictable patterns. Mornings began with stoking the stove, preparing simple porridge with foraged berries, and checking the calendar that now dominated the eastern wall. Midday brought garden work in the cooler shadows of the cabin, followed by rest during the afternoon heat. Evenings were for handcrafts, weaving baskets for storage, sewing baby clothes from salvaged fabrics, carving simple utensils. Elena and Matteo visited weekly, bringing supplies Sarah couldn't produce herself, and checking her pregnancy's progress. Their initial wariness had evolved into something like friendship, though conversation remained primarily practical. "The baby has dropped," Elena noted during her latest examination. "Not much longer now, 2 weeks, maybe less." The information should have frightened Sarah, but instead she felt a strange calm. She was ready, or as ready as circumstances allowed. The cabin was prepared. She had absorbed knowledge from Eleanor's journal, Elena's instructions, and her own research books. The fear remained, but now coexisted with confidence. That evening, as dusk settled over the clearing, Sarah conducted what had become a daily ritual, walking the perimeter of her domain, greeting plants by name, noting changes, planning tomorrow's tasks. Her body moved differently now, adjusting to the baby's lower position. Each step required deliberation, her center of gravity unfamiliar. At the garden's edge, she paused to observe new growth. Carrots showing feathery tops, bean vines climbing trellises made from branches, medicinal herbs spreading their distinctive fragrances in the humid air. "Eleanor would be pleased," came Matteo's voice behind her. Sarah turned, unsurprised by his silent approach. "I hope so. I've tried to honor what she created." Matteo nodded, his expression thoughtful. "But you make it your own too, as it should be." He carried something wrapped in cloth, which he presented with ceremonial gravity. "For the child." Sarah unwrapped the bundle to find a mobile of carved wooden stars and moons, strung on sinew thin enough to move with the slightest breeze. "To guide dreams," Matteo explained. "Hang above the cradle." The gift moved Sarah deeply. It represented more than decoration. It was acceptance, acknowledgement that her child belonged in this place, under these stars. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Later, after Matteo departed, Sarah hung the mobile above the cradle. The wooden shapes spun gently, casting shifting shadows in the candlelight. She stood watching their hypnotic movement, one hand resting on her belly, the other on the cradle's edge, connecting present to future. The transformation was complete, not just of the cabin, but of herself. The woman who had fled Seattle in panic and grief no longer existed. In her place stood someone stronger, more capable, connected to this land and the life growing within her in ways the old Sarah could never have imagined. Her modern possessions now lived alongside wilderness tools. Her scientific knowledge had merged with Elena's traditional wisdom and Eleanor's practical experience. Her city sensibilities had adapted to forest rhythms. "We're ready," she told her baby as darkness settled over the cabin. "Whenever you are." In the night, Sarah dreamed of Eleanor, not as she appeared in the photos, but as she might have looked, working in this same garden, sleeping in this same cabin, watching these same stars. In the dream, Eleanor nodded in approval, her expression both sad and satisfied, as if passing a torch Sarah hadn't realized she was meant to carry. Sarah woke at dawn, the dream still vivid. Outside her window, birds called their morning songs, a deer and fawn browsed at the forest edge, and mist rose from the ground in ethereal tendrils. For the first time since arriving, Sarah didn't think of the cabin as Eleanor's place where she was staying temporarily. It was home. Their home. The sound of an engine shattered the forest tranquility. Sarah froze in the garden, her heart racing as the unfamiliar noise grew louder. In nearly 7 months at the cabin, she had heard only natural sounds: wind, rain, animals, the occasional distant thunder. This mechanical intrusion signaled human presence, and not Matteo or Elena, who always arrived on foot. Sarah retreated to the cabin's porch, one hand protectively over her belly. Through the trees a vehicle appeared, a green pickup truck, with government forestry logos emblazoned on its doors. It stopped at the edge of the clearing, and a uniformed ranger emerged, surveying the area with professional interest. Tall and broad-shouldered with sun-weathered skin, the ranger removed his hat as he approached, revealing salt and pepper hair cut military short. His expression registered surprise when he saw Sarah's heavily pregnant form. "Ma'am," he called, maintaining a respectful distance. "I'm Ranger Mike Donovan, Forest Service. Didn't expect to find anyone out here." Sarah gripped the porch railing, torn between flight and confrontation. "This is private property," she said, hoping it was true. The ranger nodded, seemingly unperturbed by her defensiveness. "Yes, ma'am. That's actually why I'm here." He reached into his breast pocket and withdrew an official-looking envelope. "I've been trying to locate the owner of record. Are you Sarah Matthews by any chance?" Hearing her name spoken aloud after so many months sent a jolt through Sarah's body. How had he found her? What did he want? "Why are you looking for her?" she asked cautiously. "Legal matter." He held up the envelope, court documents requiring her signature. From a James Matthews. James. The name hit like a physical blow. Sarah steadied herself against the railing, suddenly lightheaded. Concern crossed the ranger's face. "Ma'am, are you all right? Should I?" "I'm Sarah Matthews," she interrupted, her voice steadier than she felt. "What does he want?" Relief flickered across Ranger Donovan's features. "Mind if I come closer? These should be delivered personally." Sarah nodded reluctantly, and he approached the porch, offering the envelope without stepping too close, respecting her obvious wariness. The paper felt unnaturally smooth against her calloused fingers, a reminder of the world she'd left behind. Inside was a court summons. The legal terminology swam before her eyes, but certain phrases stood out with terrible clarity. Petition contesting divorce, rights of the unborn child, maternal fitness in question. James wasn't simply letting her go as she'd believed. He was coming after her, after their baby. "How did you find me?" Sarah asked, her voice hollow. Ranger Donovan looked uncomfortable. "GPS tracking on your last credit card purchase at the outdoor store, plus reports from hikers about smoke from this area. He gestured at the cabin. This place is technically on conservation land, though there's some dispute about the original mining claim boundaries. Been abandoned so long most folks forgot it existed. Sarah sank onto the porch bench, the document trembling in her hand. After everything, the cabin repairs, the garden, her growing connection with Eleanor's legacy and the wilderness itself, James could still reach out and threaten it all with mere words on paper. He abandoned me, she said, not sure why she was telling this stranger. When he found out I was pregnant, just walked away. The ranger's expression softened with understanding. Ma'am Sarah, I'm just the messenger, but for what it's worth, I've seen how you've restored this place. Takes real grit to live out here, especially in your condition. Sarah stared at the summons, reality crashing back like the storm that had tested the cabin's foundation. The world she'd escaped hadn't forgotten her. Worse, it was trying to reclaim her and her child. What happens now? She asked quietly. Legally, you're required to respond within 30 days. Ranger Donovan gestured toward the paper. But practically speaking, these backwoods court orders can get delayed in processing. Paperwork gets lost. Responses take time to file. Their eyes met, and Sarah understood his implicit offer. This man, bound by official duty to deliver the summons, was suggesting he could buy her time. Why would you help me? She asked. The ranger's weathered face creased in a sad smile. 26 years working these forests, I've learned to read people. Whatever brought you here, you've put down roots. Made something. He nodded toward her belly. And you're about to bring new life into a home you built with your own hands. That counts for something in my book. Sarah clutched the document, mind racing. What if he comes looking himself? These woods are vast, and access roads limited. I control which vehicles get permits. Ranger Donovan replaced his hat. Without a guide who knows this area, he'd never find this place, and I'm the only guide on the government payroll. Hope flickered dimly. So I have options. You have time. Use it wisely. He turned to leave, then paused. I'll be back in 2 weeks. Regular patrol. If you need anything, medical supplies, communication with the outside, I can help within reason. After the ranger departed, Sarah sat motionless on the porch, the legal document lying beside her like a poisonous snake. The sounds of the forest gradually returned. Birds resuming their calls, wind rustling leaves, the distant gurgle of the stream, but their comforting familiarity now felt tenuous, threatened. Inside the cabin, the cradle Mateo had helped her build stood ready. The calendar marked with Elena's predictions for the birth hung on the wall. Eleanor's journal rested on the table. All the elements of the life she'd created here seemed suddenly fragile against the power represented by that single piece of paper. Elena's face remained impassive as Sarah showed her the court documents. The midwife's weathered hands touched the official papers briefly before returning to her task, arranging dried herbs on the table between them. Men make paper. Nature makes life, Elena said finally, sorting leaves with practiced precision. Which is stronger, do you think? Sarah had spent 2 days in turmoil since Ranger Donovan's visit, alternating between panic and determination. In the city, papers win, she replied. Laws, courts, money, they have power there. But we are not in the city. Elena selected specific herbs, creating separate bundles tied with thin strips of bark. Here, different powers rule. The methodical organization of medicinal plants grounded Sarah. She recognized many now: elderberry for immune support, raspberry leaf for uterine strength, yarrow for bleeding, comfrey for healing. Others remained mysterious, known only to Elena through generations of traditional knowledge. These will help with pain, Elena explained, indicating a particularly fragrant bundle. These for after bleeding. These, if fever comes. Her dark eyes held Sarah's. Birth is coming soon. This is what matters now. Sarah's hand moved to her belly, where the baby had dropped noticeably lower. And after birth? What then? If James finds us, one challenge at a time. Elena continued her work, arranging the completed bundles in a flat basket, woven specifically for this purpose. First, bring life safely, then protect it. The simple prioritization settled something in Sarah's mind. Elena was right. The immediate task was birth. Legal battles could wait. When Matteo arrived that afternoon, he brought Ranger Donovan with him. The two men had clearly developed a rapport, evidenced by their comfortable silence as they approached the cabin. Sarah's wariness dissolved when she saw the supplies they carried, additional medical items Elena had requested, plus practical necessities Sarah hadn't even thought to ask for. "Figured you could use these," the ranger said, setting down a box containing batteries, a better first aid kit, and a small solar-powered radio. "And this," he handed her a sealed envelope. "Information on maternal rights in custody cases. Friend of mine is a family court clerk. Nothing official. Just knowledge." Sarah accepted the envelope with profound gratitude. "Thank you. I don't know why you're helping me, but let's just say I've seen what happens when courts decide what's best, without understanding the full picture." Something in his tone suggested personal experience. Besides, any woman who can turn this place into a functional homestead while 8 months pregnant deserves a fighting chance. While Elena continued her medicinal preparations inside, the men helped Sarah complete final preparations outside. Matteo reinforced the garden fence against hungry wildlife. Ranger Donovan, who introduced himself as Mike when off-duty, repaired the roof section damaged in the recent storm. Together they stacked firewood along the cabin's southern wall, enough to last through the coming weeks when Sarah would be recovering. "Winter comes early up here," Mike warned. "First snow possible within 6 weeks." Sarah hadn't considered the seasonal challenges ahead. Her focus had narrowed to the birth itself, not the aftermath during changing weather. Matteo seemed to read her thoughts. "We will help, not alone." That evening, as sunset painted the clearing in amber hues, the 4 unlikely allies sat at Sarah's table, sharing a meal of rabbit stew and wild greens. The conversation flowed more easily than Sarah would have imagined, centered around practical matters, but occasionally touching on deeper connections. "Why did you really come looking for me?" Sarah asked Mike when the meal was finished. "You could have just marked the papers as undeliverable." The ranger considered his answer carefully. 20 years ago, my sister disappeared while pregnant. Her husband had been..." He paused, controlling. "She ran like you. Never found her." His gaze met Sarah's directly. "Always hoped someone might have helped her." The simple explanation revealed depths to this stranger that Sarah hadn't anticipated. They were connected through understanding, through recognition of what drove someone to flee into wilderness, rather than face certain defeat in civilization. Before departing, Elena conducted one final examination. "Any day now," she confirmed. "I will stay nearby. Matteo has prepared a camp." This news surprised Sarah. "You'll stay in the forest? But first, babies take their time, but when they decide to come, they hurry." Elena packed her supplies efficiently. "Better close than far." Mike offered his radio. "Emergency channel is programmed. I'm stationed 20 miles west. Can be here in under an hour if needed." As they left in the gathering dusk, Sarah stood on the porch, watching their departing figures. Elena's sturdy silhouette, Matteo's tall frame, Mike's confident stride. 3 strangers who had become her unlikely support system in the wilderness. Back inside, Sarah surveyed the preparations. The birthing area was ready with clean cloths. Elena's medicinal herbs arranged in precise order, fresh water stored in covered containers. The cradle stood prepared with soft bedding. Equipment for washing and swaddling the newborn waited nearby. Her hand drifted to the small collection of herbs. Elena had instructed her to begin taking daily pregnancy tonics to strengthen her body for the work ahead. The aromatic mixture had become part of her evening ritual, brewing in water from the stream while she reviewed Eleanor's journal entries about endurance and perseverance. As night settled over the cabin, Sarah sat by candlelight, methodically grinding the herbs with mortar, and pestle. The repetitive motion was meditative, connecting her to the countless women throughout history who had prepared for childbirth with similar simple tools, similar anxieties, similar hopes. "Almost time to meet you," she whispered to her child. "And nothing, no papers, no laws, no man, will take you from me." Sarah woke to a strange sensation, a tightening across her abdomen, unlike the Braxton Hicks contractions she'd experienced for weeks. This felt different, more purposeful. She lay still, breathing deeply as Eleanor's journal had advised, noting the time on the old clock Matteo had repaired. 4:17 in the morning. Outside, rain had begun falling, gentle at first but steadily increasing in intensity. The weather radio Mike had provided forecast, a significant storm system moving through the area. Sarah rose carefully, wincing as another contraction gripped her, still mild, but unmistakably real. "Not the most convenient timing," she murmured to her unborn child as she moved about the cabin, preparing for the day with deliberate calm. She stoked the fire in the stove, filled water containers, and arranged Elena's herbal preparations in the order they would be bead. By sunrise, the contractions had established a pattern, approximately 12 minutes apart, lasting about 30 seconds each. Still early labor, according to Elena's instructions. Sarah used the emergency radio, sending the pre-arranged signal that would alert Elena and Matteo at their forest camp. The rain intensified as morning progressed. Sarah paced the cabin floor, pausing to breathe through contractions that gradually increased in strength. Through the windows, she watched water pooling in the clearing, streams forming along the paths Elena and Matteo would use to reach her. By midday, with no sign of help arriving, Sarah's concern grew. The contractions now came 8 minutes apart, more intense but still manageable. She tried the radio again, receiving only static in response. The storm had likely disrupted the signal. Sarah opened the cabin door, looking out at the deluge. The rain fell in sheets, driven by wind that bent treetops and sent debris skittering across the clearing. The path to the forest where Elena and Matteo had made their camp was now a rushing stream, impassable without significant risk. Realization settled heavily. She would face this alone, at least for now. "Just us after all," she told her baby, closing the door against the storm. Sarah methodically reviewed everything Elena had taught her about unassisted birth, position options, breathing techniques, signs of complications. She arranged supplies within easy reach of the birthing area: clean cloths, herbal preparations, the sharpened knife for cutting the umbilical cord, string for tying it, the water vessel Elena had given her specifically for labor, a ceramic bowl decorated with symbols of strength and protection. She filled with the prepared herbal infusion. The warm liquid soothed her through increasingly difficult contractions, now 6 minutes apart. As afternoon turned to evening, the storm reached its peak. Wind howled around the cabin corners, finding every small draft and making the candles flicker. Rain pounded the roof like thousands of impatient fingers. The cacophony matched Sarah's internal experience as labor intensified, wild, primal, beyond control. A particularly strong contraction doubled Sarah forward, forcing a gasp from her lips. The ceramic bowl slipped from her hands, shattering on the floor, the carefully prepared liquid spreading across wooden planks. "No, no, no," Sarah moaned, staring at the broken vessel. Elena had emphasized its importance, not just practically but symbolically. Women in her family had used it for generations during difficult births. Tears mingled with sweat on Sarah's face as she carefully gathered the fragments, each one sharp-edged and dangerous. The largest piece had broken cleanly, still holding a small amount of the herbal liquid. Sarah set it aside carefully, then swept the remaining shards into a cloth. The incident triggered a wave of fear she'd been holding at bay. What if something went wrong? What if the baby came in a dangerous position? What if she hemorrhaged, alone in this cabin, with Elena prevented from reaching her by the raging storm? Another contraction seized her, stronger than before. Sarah braced against the table, breathing through the pain as she'd practiced. When it passed, she straightened with new determination. Fear wouldn't help her now. Only focus, only strength. From the shelf, Sarah took Eleanor's journal, turning to the dog-eared pages he'd read repeatedly in recent weeks. Eleanor had never given birth herself, but she'd included knowledge gathered from women in remote communities, practical wisdom, passed through generations. "Trust your body," Eleanor had written. "It knows what to do, even when your mind doubts." Sarah moved to the birthing area, arranging pillows to support her in a semi-reclined position. The contractions now came 5 minutes apart, each a wave of increasing intensity. Between them, she sipped water and whispered encouragement to herself and her child. As darkness fell completely, the storm's fury began to ease. The wind's howl softened to a moan, the rains pounding to a steady drum. But inside Sarah, the storm continued to build. Contractions intensified, the pain rising to new levels that required all her focus to manage. "I can do this," she repeated, during a brief respite. "Women have done this forever. Eleanor survived alone in this cabin for 15 years. I can bring one child into the world." In moments of clarity between contractions, Sarah found herself thinking of the women who had come before her, not just Elena and Eleanor, but countless others across time, who had labored alone, who had summoned strength from somewhere beyond themselves when there was no alternative. The broken water vessel sat on the table, its jagged edges catching candlelight, no longer perfect, no longer whole, but still capable of holding what remained. Like her, like this cabin, broken in places, but fundamentally sound. When the next contraction came, Sarah didn't fight it. She surrendered to the ancient process that had begun, trusting that somewhere beyond the storm, Elena was trying to reach her, but knowing ultimately that this journey was hers alone to complete. Time lost meaning as Sarah's labor progressed. Contractions now came relentlessly, barely 3 minutes apart, each one a tidal wave of sensation that required all her concentration to navigate. Between waves, she drifted in a dreamlike state, her mind floating free from her laboring body. In these moments of strange clarity, memories surfaced unbidden. Her mother, dead 10 years now, braiding Sarah's hair for her first school dance. Her father teaching her to identify wildflowers on rare weekend hikes. James on their wedding day, eyes bright with promises he would later break. "Not him," Sarah whispered during one brief respite. "Not now." Instead, she focused on Eleanor, though they'd never met. The woman whose journal had guided Sarah through wilderness survival, whose cabin now sheltered her in this most vulnerable moment. In her mind's eye, Sarah saw Eleanor kneeling in the garden, hands deep in soil, the same soil that had nourished the plants that had fed Sarah throughout her pregnancy. A particularly intense contraction gripped her, different from the others. Instinctively, Sarah changed positions, moving to her knees, leaning against the bed frame. Her body was pushing now, an involuntary force beyond conscious control. "It's time," she gasped, recognizing the transition Elena had described. Outside, the storm had subsided to gentle rain, its rhythmic patter on the roof, a counterpoint to Sarah's labored breathing. Inside, candles illuminated the birthing area with warm, flickering light, casting long shadows across the cabin walls. Sarah arranged clean cloths beneath her, positioned the supplies within reach, and surrendered to the powerful urges of her body. With each contraction, she bore down, working with the force rather than against it. Between pushes, she rested her forehead against the cool wooden bed frame, gathering strength for the next effort. "We're doing this together," she told her child, one hand cradling her contracting belly. Time compressed and expanded. Moments of excruciating effort alternated with brief intervals of exhausted rest. Sarah lost count of the pushes, aware only of the incremental progress, the baby moving down, her body stretching to accommodate passage. A burning sensation signaled the baby's head crowning. Sarah reached down, feeling the soft curve of her child's skull emerging into the world. The most intense pain yet had her crying out, the sound primal and echoing in the cabin's confines. Almost there, she encouraged herself, repeating Elena's instructions like a mantra. Breathe through it, don't rush. With the next contraction, Sarah pushed with careful control, supporting the emerging head with her hand, as Elena had demonstrated using a doll. The sensation of her child's head being born sent a shock of wonder through her exhaustion. One more, she whispered, gathering her remaining strength. The final push delivered the baby's shoulders and body in a rush of sensation and fluid. Sarah caught her child in trembling hands, bringing the tiny form up to rest against her chest. For one breathless moment, the world stood still. Then the baby, her daughter, drew her first breath and released it in an indignant wail. "You're here," Sarah sobbed, tears streaming down her face as she cradled the squirming, crying infant. "You're really here." The newborn's skin was dusky pink, gradually brightening as her powerful cries filled her lungs with air. Dark hair, matted with birth fluids, curled against her perfectly formed head. Her tiny hands curled into fists that waved with surprising strength. Working from memory of Elena's instructions, Sarah cleared the baby's nose and mouth, wrapped her in the softest cloth she had prepared, and held her close to share body warmth. The umbilical cord still pulsed between them, connecting mother and child as it had for 9 months. Only when the cord stopped pulsing did Sarah use the sterilized knife to cut it, tying it carefully with clean string, as Elena had shown her. The physical separation felt momentous, symbolic, her daughter, now her own person, beginning a life outside Sarah's body. The afterbirth followed with minimal effort, Sarah checking it carefully for completeness, as instructed. Then, finally, she could rest, leaning back against the bed with her daughter cradled in her arms. "Hello, Eleanor," Sarah whispered, the name she had chosen coming naturally to her lips.
"Welcome home." Outside, dawn broke over the forest, sending fingers of light through the cabin windows. The storm had cleared completely, leaving the world washed clean, glistening with raindrops that caught the morning sun like countless tiny stars. Sarah shifted carefully, wrapping her newborn in the special blanket she had crafted during the final weeks of pregnancy. Made from the softest salvaged fabric, Sarah had embroidered it with symbols from Eleanor's journal, protective sigils, images of strength and growth, representations of the forest that had sheltered them both. The blanket enfolded baby Eleanor like an embrace from the generations of women whose wisdom had guided them safely through the night, the original Eleanor whose journal had been Sarah's companion, Elena whose knowledge had prepared her, Sarah's own mother whose strength she had inherited. As the first full rays of sunlight illuminated the cabin, Sarah heard voices outside, Elena and Matteo, finally able to navigate the rain-soaked paths, arriving hours after the fact. Their concern would turn to celebration when they discovered both mother and child healthy, the birth completed successfully despite isolation. But for this perfect moment, Sarah savored the solitude, just her and her daughter in the quiet dawn, in this cabin that had transformed from refuge to birthplace to home. "We did it ourselves," Sarah told baby Eleanor, her voice filled with exhausted wonder. "But we were never really alone." 3 months had transformed the world. Summer's lush greens had given way to autumn's fiery palette, painting the forest surrounding the cabin in amber, crimson, and gold. The garden, having yielded its bounty, now rested under mulch of fallen leaves. Morning frost gilded the clearing, melting to diamonds in the strengthening sun. Inside the cabin, an equally profound transformation had occurred. The space once dominated by survival necessities now centered around the rhythms of infant care. A clothesline strung near the stove held tiny garments fashioned from repurposed fabrics. The cradle, now well used, stood within arm's reach of the bed. Sarah had properly constructed with Matteo's help. And at the center of it all, baby Eleanor, Ellie, thriving despite circumstances that modern medicine would have deemed challenging at best, dangerous at worst. Sarah sat in the doorway, nursing her daughter while morning light bathed the clearing.
Ellie's tiny hand rested against her mother's skin, her dark eyes, so like Sarah's own, already showing alertness beyond her 12 weeks of life. "Your grandmother would have loved you," Sarah told her, meaning both her own mother and the cabin's namesake. "Strong women, all of us." Footsteps on the path announced Elena's arrival. The midwife visited weekly, checking both mother and child with practiced hands and approving nods. Today she carried a basket of late autumn herbs and roots for winter remedy. "She grows well," Elena observed, setting down her basket to gently stroke Ellie's cheek. "And you? The bleeding has stopped completely?" Sarah nodded. "Last week, just as you predicted." Their conversation flowed with the easy familiarity born of shared experience. Elena had arrived shortly after Ellie's birth, finding both mother and child exhausted but healthy. Her quiet pride in Sarah's accomplishment had been validation beyond words. As Elena prepared medicinal tinctures at the table, Ranger Donovan, Mike, appeared at the edge of the clearing. His visits had become regular, bringing news from the outside world and supplies that couldn't be foraged or made. "Ladies," he called respectfully before approaching. "Brought something you should see." In his hands was an official-looking envelope. Sarah's heart sank, memories of the previous legal threat rising like bile in her throat. "It's good news," Mike assured her, seeing her expression. "Very good news." The documents inside bore court seals and legal language, but their meaning was clear. James had withdrawn his custody petition, signing away his parental rights entirely. A separate notice indicated the divorce had been finalized, returning Sarah to her maiden name. "How?" Sarah breathed, staring at the papers as if they might vanish. Mike smiled, his weathered face crinkling. "Let's just say your ex-husband's new fiancée wasn't thrilled to learn about his abandoned pregnant wife, especially since he'd told her you were the one who left him. He's engaged already." The information should have hurt, but Sarah felt only distant surprise. To his client, the one he was having an affair with. Mike shrugged. "When I suggested that pursuing custody might involve revealing the full timeline to the courts, he reconsidered his position." Sarah looked down at Ellie, peacefully sleeping against her chest, then at the legal papers that guaranteed their freedom. "It's really over, more than over," Mike continued. "There's something else." He produced another document. "I've been researching Eleanor Pruitt, the previous occupant. Turns out she had no heirs, and the property taxes went unpaid after her death. The county reclaimed the land, but it falls within an area now designated for conservation." Sarah waited, uncertain where this was leading. "I pulled some strings, called in favors," Mike explained. "Conservation easement program needed a resident botanical specialist for this sector. Position includes this cabin and surrounding 5 acres, plus a small stipend. It's yours, if you want it." The implications slowly dawned. Legal residence, legitimate income, a future here not as a fugitive, but as a recognized steward of the land. "I don't know what to say," Sarah whispered. Elena, who had been quietly working at the table, spoke up. "Say yes. This is where you belong now." That in, after Elena and Mike had departed, Sarah carried Ellie outside to watch the sunset. The autumn air held crispness that promised winter was approaching, but the cabin was ready, weather-proofed, stocked with firewood, pantry filled with preserved foods from the garden. At the edge of the clearing stood a simple wooden sign Sarah had carved over several days. The letters, though amateur, were clear and deep, intended to weather many seasons. New beginnings. "This is your home," Sarah told her daughter softly. "Not just shelter, not just hiding place, but home." Ellie cooed in response, her tiny fingers grasping at golden leaves drifting down around them. Inside, on the shelf above the bed, Eleanor's journal sat alongside Sarah's own, which she had begun the day of Ellie's birth. Beside them stood the carved wooden animals from Matteo, the medicinal preparations from Elena, the legal documents from Mike, testaments to the community that had formed around this once abandoned place. From the empty cabin she had discovered in desperation, Sarah had created more than survival. She had forged belonging. From the woman who had fled in fear and grief, she had become someone new, mother, provider, caretaker of this small piece of wilderness. As twilight deepened, mother and daughter returned to the warmth of their cabin. Sarah lit candles against the gathering darkness, their flames illuminating the space that had witnessed her transformation. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Winter preparation, adaptation to Ellie's changing needs, the beginning of her official conservation work. But tonight, cradling her daughter in the home they had both claimed, Sarah Matthews knew with bone-deep certainty that what had begun as abandonment had become the greatest gift, the chance to build a life on her own terms, rooted in the strength she hadn't known she possessed until the forest showed her.